Good afternoon and welcome back to the Extreme Hangout for another exciting, and I know it's going to be an enormously engaging, in fact probably intoxicating panel on the psychology of desire. I am not going to take any time on this stage at all because I want you to hear from our fantastic panelists. Please put your hands together and welcome them all.
Hi there, I'm Mary Fellows. I'm Fashion Impact Director here at Extreme Hangout. Thank you all for joining. Special thanks to the team here, especially Amber and Al, who are the founders. I say that I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper or villain turned part-time hero. I've spent 22 years working in the fashion industry and recently just had enough and had to move into sustainability. It was either that or go and work for an NGO, and then I decided I've got really good relationships and good skills, so I can probably make more change from within. We're here to talk about the psychology of desire and how that intersects with excess consumption. And it's worth mentioning that one of my calls to action to this was when I was volunteering at an animal sanctuary in the northern Himalayas. And the first task I was given that day by the vet who I was trailing around with was to go and tend to the wounds of a cow. And cows are obviously sacred in India. And this particular cow I was tending to had fallen onto something sharp. And she had a massive hole in her ribs. Oh, my paper, sorry. She had a massive hole right here in her ribs. And out of her ribs, you could see into her intestines, and what was coming out of her intestines was post-consumer textile waste. And having worked for 15, 20 years at that point in fashion, it gave me nightmares, and I realized I couldn't carry on. She also had, this cow, excess consumption literally as a visual metaphor right there. There was like bits of milk cartons and bits of plastic. Just this weekend as well, we went to Cairo, me and the gang who are here with us. We stopped in Cairo just to go and see the pyramids and just actually to get some ideas as well to kind of context set for being here. And as we sat on the back of some camels to go and examine the pyramids, all we saw in the desert around us, right up to some of one of the world's 7 wonders, was just endless plastic bottles and bottle tops and cigarette lighters and rubbish packets. And it's just everywhere, right? No one needs to be reminded or told of how much the planet is sinking and choking under landfill and all the other excess consumption. Now, fashion is one of the worst polluters, but it's not one of the only ones. But it is a metaphor quite often for what else goes on. And in the same way, fashion can be a very big driver to change other sectors. If you think about how many times what's trending or what is fashionable, it becomes a metaphor for other sectors. So I've spent the last 6 months or so writing a white paper that assesses consumer behavior. And in that, from the brief I had from the commissioner, was to really look at consumer behavior and what happens post-transaction and how we bring down this excess consumption in fashion, but also other wider sectors. And I felt that one really big area that I could not find enough research on was about what happens in the brain. What are the drivers to excess consumption? When it comes to fashion and other status symbols and other items, a lot of the time, people aren't aware that there's a dopamine rush taking place. We have these neurocircuits in our brains that are triggered. They're electronic signals. When we consume something that gives us pleasure, a whole set of signals take off. And whether it's fashion or beauty or watches or other things that are status symbols, they help us tell the world who we want to be, what social group we belong to or want to belong to, who we want to signify who we are. And the other circuitry that this bears quite a similar resemblance to is that of the algorithms, another set of invisible electronic signals that are being triggered all the time when we're doom scrolling on our mobile phones or our other devices. These, however, do not have their roots in Mother Nature. Mother Nature designed us in a perfect way to operate absolutely perfectly. However, these algorithms and other devices and circuits that go on have a slightly darker side to them. A friend of mine I used to work with was a photographer. He got hired full-time by Apple 10 years ago. So he went to go and live in Palo Alto and ended up drinking too many cocktails with a psychologist who had also been put on the payroll by Apple. And this psychologist just announced that he was getting drunk because he'd had it in his notice. And so this photographer said, why? And he said, well, I couldn't go on. They hired me to come and guide them on how to be responsible towards consumers. And it turns out all they've wanted me to do was help them work out how to trigger the most dopamine rushes with the likes and the clicks and the electronic notifications. And so he quit. So these dark wizards of Silicon Valley are, to a point, manipulating consumers who probably don't know any different. And why would they? They've been very successful in their tools and in these circuits. However, the key question here is what is going on underneath the psychology desire, and how do we work with it to change behavior, to change excess consumption, and bring down the amount of rubbish that is choking our planet to death. So first we need to educate people, anyone who's on TikTok or Instagram or any of these other platforms, to know and be able to make more mindful choices about what is going on when they know how they could be being manipulated or targeted or bombarded is important. And that way they can carry on making their choices in full knowledge. I've got a stellar lineup of panelists here to examine this particular topic. And I'm now going to ask them to introduce themselves. Let's start with all of you. James, would you like to go? Please tell us.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all here today. So I'm James Whitehead. I've had a long and varied career in the advertising and marketing world. I became the CEO of J. Walter Thompson, which was one of the most established advertising agencies in the world. I went on to do a digital role across WPP.
And WPPR.
And WPPR, the largest communications company in the world. And then 2 years ago, I took a complete change, and I went into starting up a green tech business, and that green tech business is there to solve water scarcity and turn seawater into fresh water using only the power of the sun. And so it's a zero carbon system. And I'm now all in to combat climate change. So a bit of a change.
Yeah, welcome. Another poacher turned gamekeeper. Thank you. Jamila, tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me. I'm Jamila Brown. I'm the head of House Foundations at Soho House. So in my role, I work with our teams and our members all around the world to bring to life our goals and values and our pillars across diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, charitable giving, and talent incubation.
Thank you very much. Aisling.
Hi everyone, I'm Aisling. I'm the co-founder of Sid Connects. We are a women-led sustainability consultancy, and we help businesses become a force for good. But pre that, I worked in the beauty industry for over a decade. So I got my first job at L'Oreal when I was 20, the biggest cosmetics company in the world, in the PR team. And back then, sustainability was called corporate social responsibility, and it was sat with the most junior people in the team. So I spent over 10 years in the beauty industry, and the term greenwashing went into the dictionary just in September. And so as a greenwasher, I'm going to kind of explain to you what happens behind the scenes. So I think it's a really important message for any ladies sitting here today to understand what happens behind the scenes. So looking forward to this panel.
And men. Oh.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Adana Steinacker. I'm a medical doctor by profession and a YouTube content creator. In terms of my involvement in this space, it's in two folds. As a creator, I do have a lifestyle platform, and I am now launching a series with YouTube teaching kids about sustainability. And as a medical professional, there's not a lot of effective communication on the impacts of climate change on health. So I have a network of medical doctors who are going to be sharing this on YouTube. And I've since then transitioned from clinical practice to digital entrepreneurship. So I'm a full-time digital entrepreneur now, doing good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I think we'll go back to our posing question about really whether what I've outlined here today, whether that really is the case and how that actually works. But what we don't want to do is what often happens across the world of climate change and sustainability is to outline too many problems, because I think it really has to be about tangible, real solutions and optimism and giving people hope. But let's start with unraveling this problem and mapping out so that all of you watching here today, and I know that we have a very, very strong young audience, Gen Y, Gen Z, for all of you out there, digital natives, I think we're going to find out really about what does actually go on in the world of advertising, marketing, and these digital platforms. James, could you tell us about that in your experience as someone who's, you've created ad campaigns for household name global brands. You've done this over 3 decades. Tell us about that.
Sure. Okay. So I won't tell you everything. I mean, I'll be here a long time.
Yes.
But
a few anecdotes.
But I think that there are probably like 3 things that I think are worth mentioning and talking about. So the first of them is to just focus in on data. And for me, the real crux of this is about data, and it's about who can get hold of what data, and then how it's used. And we've often seen this done in the right way, and more than often it is, it's consensual, and there is good privacy being met. But there are times when it's not, and I think that data is key, because what we really mean by data is we mean insight, and so for us as marketeers and communicators and brand builders, it's about really understanding people and understanding their behaviors. It's about understanding their desires, and it's also about understanding their fears. And we've seen that go wrong, and there was a great example of this 5 or 10 years ago with a sort of a political data analytics and advertising business that really misused trust.
Is this Cambridge Analytica?
It is.
And there was a story with denim, wasn't there? They looked at if they could map the behaviours of denim.
That's right.
Consumers, they could work out how they would vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so they went out to a few 100,000 people with an app that was called My Digital Life, and they said they were just collecting information about people for academic uses, and in actual fact that wasn't the cause at all. It wasn't the reason at all, and in the end, the total count, I think, was 87 million Facebook users. 87 million, because they went in and they collected insight and data and did psychometric profiling on a certain number of people, but then they were able to do it on all of their friends as well, and they were able to connect into the data and the behavior patterns around all of their friend contacts on Facebook.
Oh yes, because once you said yes to certain access,
and by creating these psychometric profiles, which is all about your behaviors, your loves, your fears, they were then able to specifically target people who might not agree with the tendencies of particular politicians who were fighting elections in America and were fighting elections in the UK. And they were then able to turn people who were on the fence the way of certain politicians in those elections. I mean, it was incredibly powerful stuff done in the wrong way.
Yeah. But it shows us how it could, deployed the right way, could be very powerful if it was driven by purpose.
Exactly.
So it shows you what can be done.
Well, exactly. And the thing about data and insight and marketing is that it's a two-way street. It's a two-way thing. So, and for that, I'm incredibly hopeful and very optimistic, because brands and businesses want to understand the way things are flowing in the world with consumers, with people, with customers, and they want to understand how they're feeling. And you don't have to be here in COP to know how people are feeling about the world and the planet at the moment.
Yeah.
And so while some brands and some businesses might still be a little bit behind the curve, I'm optimistic and hopeful about the way that people feel about the planet.
Okay.
And that's the power of the two-way street. And so the insight and data that will come from people back into brands and businesses and help them to then build the right type of purpose as a business. And I think that purpose is such a fundamental strategic thing for brands and businesses.
Yes.
And I know that purpose is used in light of climate action and wanting to do the right thing for the planet. But actually, we've been creating purpose for brands and businesses for decades.
Yeah.
It just might not have been the right P that was being fully focused
Right,
on.
so it was more purpose.
It was probably more focused on profit than it was on planet and people.
Absolutely.
And I think that we now have the pendulum is swinging, and so I believe that the right rounded purpose will get created. If not now, then very soon for all brands and all businesses, for them to be able to keep their social charter and for them to be able to exist.
And hopefully with that same possibility of the visibility and the transparency that comes with data, if there are brands who are not using data or not behaving in that way, the data will eventually also show them up. Right?
It will. And I mentioned this term, social charter, which is that, as a brand, you have to have a just reason to exist with all of us as people.
Yes.
And if you don't fit into that society of people culturally in the right way, then you won't survive. And,
good point.
And so I think that's why I'm hopeful and optimistic.
Brilliant.
And I think the trajectory is in the right way.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, the takeaway for anyone here who's about to enter the workforce is we have a lot of great young talented people out there watching digitally. So keep in mind what James said. If you're thinking about entering the workforce, those brands you might want to go and work for, or companies, look at how their purpose is. I think it's a very good point he makes. And I think with that, I'm going to refer to Aisling, who recently also, as all the things she does, she's being very, very modest. She also is a B leader, and she actually helped my business get B Corp pending status. And we talked a lot about how B Corp reconcile planet, people, and profit. So, Aisling, in your experience to this point about brands being responsible and irresponsible, and given that there's probably lots of people out here who consume beauty products, tell us a bit about what you saw when it came to profit, planet, people, and purpose in the beauty industry, and why you then ended up leaving.
So it's interesting because I went back and studied sustainability. And when you start studying sustainability, you realize there's so many problems, right? We're here at COP27. Everyone's here because we're in a climate crisis. There's inequalities. There's an environmental collapse, right? And there are so many problems. But when you start studying sustainability, you realize there's symptoms. And you go upstream, and there's symptoms of an economic system. And it's an economic system that has been built for a few, which is exploiting every single precious value out of this planet and its people, and it needs to change. And to your point, James, it's like, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of our economy? Is it to squeeze the life out of us? Because that's what it's doing. What's the purpose of a business? Is it to make as much money as possible? Because it's doing a really, really good job. We're just not going to be around to see it for much longer.
And tell us about beauty, because I know that was your one of my calls to action was including seeing that cow. I seem to remember talking to you about how you felt that balance wasn't there in the beauty industry, right? It was very much about profit, but they would also exploit the idea of planet and people to make it look like they were working for those, but they weren't. Is that right?
I mean, the thing is, so in the beauty industry, so I started in the beauty industry, I was 20. And so you would say, here's a product, it hasn't been tested on animals, but all the ingredients in the supply chain have been tested on animals. And then you're mixing it all together and saying, not tested on animals, and putting a little bunny on it. So that's, I often I joke that I'm a reformed greenwasher, because when you would challenge those things in business, you were just told to kind of shut up, little girl, you know? And so it made me come to this, what is greenwashing? And it went into the dictionary just earlier this year in September as vague or misleading information about environmental or societal practices. But the roots of it are so much deeper. And the story is so fascinating because there's actually a slide which I think Ahmed might put up for me. If he
let's see. This slide's an absolute
because the story
cracker,
is
I've seen it.
the story is so fascinating because basically the father of PR is a guy called Edward Bernays, and he was with his uncle Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud was with his uncle, and like this is why the title is perfect, right? The psychology of desire. He was,
and everyone here knows who Sigmund Freud is, right? The grandfather of psychology.
The grandfather of psychology. So he was with his nephew, explaining his new theory that people either move towards pleasure or away from pain. And Edward Bernays worked in marketing and thought, you know what? I can get people to buy more stuff. You know,
just on that theory alone.
On that theory.
So if I either send them away from pain or towards pleasure, then they'll engage.
And like you look back, and this was, it's like, look it up, look at the research. This is one of his huge PR successes in 1929. Okay, so here he is convincing women to smoke. Right? He's renamed cigarettes torches of freedom. But not only is he convincing women to smoke, he is playing very, very, very clearly on women's insecurities of becoming fat and unattractive. Okay. And we can look at that now and it looks insane. Like, how did this happen in 1929? But these tactics still happen today in the beauty industry and in fashion. And when I walked through the airport with my business partner on the way here, we saw ads saying, you know, face creams better than Botox, better than plastic surgery.
Which is implicit promotion for Botox and plastic surgery in and of itself.
You know, there's like 13-year-old girls watching this today who it's planting that seed going, do I need plastic surgery? You know, it's the term anti-aging. That was created by an exec in the 80s, a marketing exec in the 80s. And it's what is the purpose? It needs to change. And we need to notice and realize what's underneath this. You know, greenwashing is very, very deep. It goes back a long time.
Thank you very much. And I think let's go on to Dr. Adana. So you moved from being a medical doctor, you're now a YouTube creator. What was how do you carry forward? I mean, obviously, like, the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath. I'm sure everyone knows here, right? The Hippocratic Oath is that, you know, that you will do no harm. So how do you go from doing that and then carrying forward that same purpose from being a doctor and doing no harm? How do you carry that forward into being a digital entrepreneur and a YouTuber and making sure that you're responsible while still, that's your bottom line. You need to make a revenue as a digital entrepreneur. How do you reconcile that purpose and responsibility with, you know, working with those algorithms and keeping your revenue stream? Is it possible?
Yes. But sorry, I've just gotten chills listening to Aisling here about this. It's just mind-blowing. For me personally, I think there is this perfect bridge between the hat I wear as a medical professional and the hat I wear as a YouTube creator. Because as a doctor, I know all too well about the neuroscience and all of the pathways and the endorphins that make us desire, you know, something. But I feel like before that, I actually put forward my responsibility as a creator before I put my responsibility as a doctor, because I feel like before somebody sees something that makes them feel like, oh, I need to buy this, it would have been placed in front of them. And that's where my responsibility as a creator comes. Because, you know, over the years, I've amassed a following of nearly 1 million on all my social media platforms.
Wow.
These are the people that look up to me. These are the people that trust my voice. These are the community. There's a community that I've built that, you know, and that's the power of product placement, you know. When I work with brands, is because they know you're going to place my product in front of these nearly 1 million people who trust you.
So you can become a gatekeeper in that respect.
Yes, exactly that. But of course, we do this, again, thinking about profit, but not even from an evil perspective, is really that this is the way society operates. You need money to live. I'm a mother of 3 kids. They go to school. I need to be able to afford that. So I would say, starting as a creator, you know, I started at the time that the word influencer didn't even exist. There was no such thing as an influencer. The influencer industry didn't exist. So it was a community of, I like to make a joke to say people who were socially awkward. You know, I'm not socially awkward, but you had to have been socially awkward to be in a room speaking to a camera. Yeah, the video is put online. You feel like, oh, I'm talking to these hundreds of thousands of people, but at the time of recording, you're having a monologue with a device that does not speak back to you. So, but at the time, we were just interested in making virtual friends and sharing what we got up to. And then, again, I suppose the marketing execs and the brands realized, well, there's this group of people online who have people listening to them. We're going to give them all these shiny things and pay them and get them to advertise and place a product. And, you know, to that extent, you know, I'm part of the system, still am. And not because I wanted to harm anyone, not because I wanted to encourage overconsumption, but genuinely, if a brand gives me something very fancy and very nice, when I'm sharing that with my audience, it's because I'm excited by that product. I'm not asking the question, how is this made? How is this produced? What, you know, where's the greenwashing here? We're not asking these questions because we're just not even aware that these are the questions that we should be asking. And so, and so my responsibility now is understanding who are the brands I'm working with, what am I placing in front of people, and how am I convincing my audience to purchase a product.
Okay, and make smart choices, hopefully.
Yes, better choices, better promote things like pre-loved, because back in the day, even as a fashion lover, right, it was, you know, the idea of buying something that's used was not cool. Honestly. No. It was the complete opposite. Like, why would I come and announce publicly that I've just bought something that's secondhand or I've rented? Actually, that's still one that's still going on now, is rented, because a lot of people wouldn't publicly say it. So it's my responsibility to bring this conversation to my audience, saying it's okay to get something that someone,
and they need that validation.
Yes.
And Jamila, to you, so you are at the helm of a different kind of community. So we've talked about community just now with Dr. Adana, and your community of Soho House members. Tell us, how many have you got in the how many in total?
I think we're just over 150,000 people now around the world.
150,000 people. Okay, so you, as an organisation, you can really, that's a lot of people, and within their onward communities, that's a lot of people whose behavior you can change. I mean, it's a lot, right? So, I mean, that's more than a lot of magazines have, and, you know, it's fantastic. Tell us about how the successes, but also the challenges of bringing purpose to that community, while still, again, it's that same conflict that Dr. Adana's identified, which is, you know, you still have a bottom line, you still have a revenue to make, it's a business based on profit. How do you reconcile the need to make a profit, but still deliver purpose and be responsible with your community?
Yeah, good question. So Soho House, like you said, is a members club for diverse, interesting, creative people from all around the world. And we, you know, what we're selling to them essentially is membership, is the experience of being able to connect with all of these people globally who have similar interests in the creative industries or are, you know, coming up with new and innovative ideas, and they're all sharing with each other what they're doing in our spaces. And more they're sharing with us. So we have the opportunity really to engage with their stories, their ideas, their products, and use it to help drive our own social and environmental goals that we have as a business. And really using our space as a platform to help our members leverage the purpose work that they want to do has been a great success for us. So, for example, we've got a pillar in House Foundations that's called Soho Futures, and it's all around talent incubation and providing access into the creative industries for people from marginalized or lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So our members have the opportunity to put their hand up to say, I want to mentor a young person, I want to help them get access to an industry that isn't Soho House, but it is in the creative industries that maybe has barriers beyond, you know, what they maybe would have experienced. So we've had over 700 young people now go through that program, and it's all to do with, you know, giving our members the opportunity to engage and use their strengths to give back in the communities that we're in around the world.
Okay. And what about, and how does an organization like yours, with it's got, you know, these different outposts in a lot of really major global cities around the world, how would someone like that work out, okay, what are our priorities? Should we be focusing, because there's only so much time and so many resources, right? Do we work out like how to bring our emissions down? Do we work out how to uplift communities? Like, how do you reconcile like what's called, for those who don't know, ESG is environmental social governance, right? Like the ESG is one of the critical factors in how a business goes forward. Like, how do you reconcile that? Like, how do you balance that environmental with social?
Yeah, well, I mean, for sure, all three sides of ES and G are important to us, and we've got a strategy in each of those categories. But for sure, our strength as a business is the social, because our business is people. We're a people business, right?
Okay.
And like I said, we have 150,000 of these really amazing, interesting, creative people around the world who want to get involved with these programs. So whether it is using our platform to champion their sustainable sneakers that we are using now as our staff shoe, or putting, really interesting chefs who have ideas around like what does zero waste on a food menu look like, or what does climate action in a food pop-up look like, and putting that on our platform
Brilliant.
has been a really amazing opportunity for us to use our members to engage in the E while we're also doing our own internal work.
Okay.
But for sure, like I said, it's using the social aspect, and it's engaging with our members and their communities and the communities that we're in to make it not just about what we're doing, but about what we can all do together around the world.
And based on all that, I think it's so impressive, by the way, and based on all that, what advice would you give those who are both in the room, who we've got some amazing young people here in the room, and watching on live stream? What advice would you give to them if they were, in 5 years' time or 2 years' time, they hope they might be at the place where they could become a Soho House member, they'd be accepted into that community, because there is a threshold for entry, right? Like, what advice would you give them going out into their lives now as they start out in their careers? Like, if they, what kind of questions should they ask their employers so that they can try and find that same kind of value system that you outline?
Important to Soho House members are being kind, having a creative soul, coming together, and using the community as a force for good, and being able to connect and have fun and make an impact. So if those are your values as well, hold on to them. Don't let a certain manager or anyone sort of steer you in a direction that's against what you think is the right thing to do. Stay true to yourself and ask lots of questions of like the companies that you're working in and the brands and the businesses that you're giving your money to, and sort of stay aligned to your true north.
Your true north. And James, tell us about your new true north, because you've, like me and Aisling particularly, we villains turned part-time heroes. So your now true north is working with water desalination. Is that right? I mean, huge change.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I think it was something that had always been in me. It was something I'd like all through my life, or certainly from when I was about 18 onwards. I wanted to do something that was involved with the environment, with the planet, and with humanity and the environment. And so the opportunity came up, and the opportunity to combine helping to solve water scarcity problems, and water scarcity affects half the people in the world. And so it's a multi-billion person problem. And I mean, I'm so pleased that we're here in Egypt. Egypt is hugely affected by this problem, and this whole part of the world, and that we're here in Africa. This is the most affected part of the world for water scarcity problems. And when water. You can't do anything.
You can't live.
Well, water is life.
Yeah.
Water is life.
For animals, for plants, for people.
For everything. And when you take water away, life ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And it's the ultimate fundamental. So when you don't have it, to be able to deliver it and create it in a way that is completely sustainable, and is taking care of the environment and mitigating against climate change is an incredible opportunity.
So you've got a dopamine rush of a different kind.
So I get a dopamine rush every day.
That's brilliant.
Waking up with the purpose that I now have.
Yeah. Got it. And tell me something. Obviously, to my point about like the amount of plastic water bottles that we saw around the pyramids. It was like these ancient monuments that have stood for wisdom and it stood the test of time, unlike so many products these days that are manufactured to only last a hot minute. Like, what would you tell people watching today, that knowing that you have the ability to sell things, you've learnt the ability to sell things to people over your career, and you now understand the problem we have with water? What would you say to people who, when they've got that decision and they're in a rush and they're like, do I grab a bottle of water from the shop or the kiosk, or can I'll run back home and grab my refillable bottle? Like, what would you say to them, like, to try and convince them to get away from plastic bottles of water? I mean, it seems so obvious, but I mean...
Yeah, well, doing what I now do, I'm spending, every day trying to affect a massive problem and a huge challenge, a huge issue on quite a large scale. And I when I'm talking to people, and particularly when I'm talking to younger people, they're saying, I know, but other than getting directly involved in what you're doing, James, how can I play a part? What can I do? And there was about 10 days ago, it was World Sustainability Day, and it's a day that is not well enough known about and recognised and celebrated, and needs to be better known about. So I'll help advertise that for sure, as of next year. And I was putting out posts through that day, and I was saying, this is a day where you can just every one of us can just think about one small thing that I'm just going to do different from today. And I said, think about today like a sustainable New Year's Eve, where I'm going to make a resolution. And I don't know about other people, but I managed to make a resolution on New Year's Eve, and I often stick to it. For something I'm going to do different for the next year. That is a great opportunity for every one of us to think about just one thing that you're going to do different.
Such as not
so
buy
I'm
bottles
not
of
going to
water.
go and buy a plastic bottle of water from now on.
Okay.
And it can be something very small, or I'm going to turn the lights off better than I have done today.
Yeah.
That
Or
kind
in a
of
funny
thing.
way, it's like going back to Ashley's point, it's a bit like, rather than saying you must not do this, it's like, or I must not do this, should it be about, like, I'm not going to move away from pain, but I'm going to move towards pleasure. So rather than I must not buy a bottle of water, it's going to be like, I am going to feel so much better for refilling my bottle, right? Like, there's such a subtle difference in that, isn't there? But it's like...
And start really small. Start small. You don't have to change the whole world tomorrow. Start small, and if we all do that, that adds up to a lot.
It does. Collective action. And Aisling, back to you, because I think that, you spent your time in beauty, and now you spend your time in sustainability, and in the interim you worked for Huawei. I'm sure everybody here has heard of Huawei, the Chinese telecoms company. So thinking about what you saw in beauty and what you do now, how do you think about the psychology of desire as well? How do we change, particularly young people who are going to be the biggest driving force with a lot of disposable income? How can we change the way that their psychology of desire is changed, right? How can we help them understand that, like, buying something very beautiful, flea has responsibility and purpose and people built into its core? How would you advise that people look at those choices as opposed to the most convenient choices they've been used to making?
And that's, important point, because I think, coming here, it took all of my strength not to buy a new outfit. Do you know what I mean? It took all of my strength as a woman not to buy something new. And why I really, because especially we were doing this panel, I really had to reflect, why do I need to buy something new? Because I don't feel good enough. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel good enough was underneath that. And fast fashion has conditioned me into thinking I always have to have something new, and it's a lie. And so I constantly have to check myself as a woman. Why am I wearing this? Am I wearing this because I want to feel powerful? Do you know what I mean? And sometimes you can put something on and feel amazing. That doesn't necessarily mean something new. And so I think as consumers, when you work for these big companies, we have these consumer-driven strategies where we're trying to get people to consume more, consume more, consume more. When did we become consumers? We used to be citizens. The language very specifically changed. So I would say to everyone here, you're big business, that you're not going to take me as a consumer. I'm a citizen, and I'm going to make a decision on where I spend my money. And I'm not going to put it in the hands of businesses that are exploiting people and planet. I'm going to be really picky about where I spend my money, because my money has value, and I'm going to spend it with someone who has maybe made the clothes herself, or you know, I'm going to rent it, or I'm going to put my money into a female-led business who really, you know, is going to feed her kids. And then we have so much power. So I think really think about where you're spending your money. And I would say, you know, make some big changes as well. Make small changes, but make some big changes. Say, I'm not going to work for that big corporation anymore. I'm going to go and set my own business up. And
Like
there's
you
loads of
did.
grants, and there's so much support. And there's also a whole, once you do that, you realize there's a whole network of people who support each other.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think how the next question, I guess, and would lead us on to is, how do people today, in light of the amount of greenwashing that goes on, and in light of the kind of fact that, I don't know if you guys agree, if we're in a kind of post-truth era where I think a lot of people believe what they see on social or on TikTok is true. How do people, and this I guess is a question for you and Dr. Adana, I'd love to hear your point of view on this. How do you screen a company or a brand that you're either working for or buying from, services or products? How do you screen them for knowing they genuinely are not doing harm, or they are really minimizing their harm? Aisling, you first, and Dr. Adana, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
And so, yeah, I spend a bit of time in tech, right? And social media has a lot to answer for. But it has a lot of good to answer for as well, because pre-social media, brands could hide, right? As now, you can ask brands directly. You know, I remember I was working at Estee Lauder Companies when Twitter came out, and we were like, what do we do with this, you know? And suddenly, as a consumer, as a citizen, you can ask all these questions that the businesses don't know how to answer, and ask them. Keep asking them and do your research, is what I would say.
But okay, the point about that, then, I do want to hear your point on this, but here's an example. The other day, about a year ago, I saw in a magazine, I was reading digitally, this blue dress. I thought, that's nice. Like, I wonder where that's from. So I went, it was from Zalando. So I thought, oh, that's cool. I'm just curious. Let's have a look. Zalando, I don't often shop from them. They're in my kind of mass market volume retailer, but let's have a look. Oh, this blue dress has got a green tag. It's sustainable. Yay! Okay, maybe that gives me the license and the permission to buy it. So let's just find out a bit more about how sustainable it is. So go in. Look at the product details. It's made of 20% recycled polyester. And polyester is a fossil fuel, ultimately, right? So I'm like, wait a minute. They call that sustainable? So I DM'd them on Instagram, because I didn't know anyone to get hold of at Zalando at a senior level. Hey, I was thinking about buying this blue dress. It says it's sustainable, but I'm confused because it's 20% polyester. Could you help me? I've then gone into a week-long DM row, which is now like about 20 pages long with Zalando, okay? Because I obviously ended up with a combination of a chatbot and someone who had no responsibility or authority to be answering my questions and was just obviously totally terrified by me and thought I was a psycho. So when you get to that point, it leaves you with that, like, well, what do you do? Because what if you end up with a chatbot or someone who can't answer your questions? And Dr. Adana, what would you advise? Because you obviously have direct contact with audiences all the time. So how would you advise your audiences or anyone watching this? How can they get to the bottom of genuinely how good a company is and whether they should be either buying from them or working for them?
So my opinion on that is, it's not as easy to do that. I think that, you know, most of us would have to come from a place of privilege to either make the decision of, I'm not working for this company because of XYZ, or I'm now going to dig into XYZ before I purchase or before I make this decision. Like, let's be honest, as somebody who has an audience, you know, with several, you know, economic status and age brackets and, you know, nationalities, it's not, you know, this conversation honestly is being had more in the West than on my continent of Africa.
Let's hear about that.
Yeah, but it's not as easy when someone's looking for minimum wage to keep their family, you know, alive and to clothe their kids and to feed them. They can't make this very bold decision to turn down a job opportunity when that's really decisive of whether their family are gonna, their kids are gonna, go to school or not. So I think, you know, in the words of Solitaire Townsend, who is a lady that I've gotten inspired by very recently, she said, put your hand up and say, I'm a bad environmentalist. You know, I don't want to be perfect, but I'm aware that these are the little steps that I would take. These are the little things that I would do consciously until I can do more. Okay. So you build on the work that you're doing. So I would say, you know, approaching it from a place of intention that you want to do better, but you might not be fully capable of doing best at the point of starting.
It's progress over perfection.
So, honestly, I can all dress very nicely. I cannot tell you what Manolos are made from. But at least I know that when I'm tempted to buy a new pair of shoes to come here, I will go back to my closet, my old shoes. And for me, that's responsibility of not purchasing more and to keep using this until the heels fall off.
And then replace
it. Yeah. Or to put it on one of the sites for other women who can afford to purchase it to be able to rent it. So I think it's about starting small but being aware. And that's why, as a content creator, I do really appreciate the efforts of platforms like YouTube who are bringing creators into the space. Prior to now, these conversations are being had by people who are not even affected on a day-to-day by these problems, right? And at the end of the day, they have the meetings, everyone, goes off with this policy that they're going to implement, and then we're back here talking. And, as on an individual level, you're not even aware of what you're supposed to be doing, but as a creator, I've been invited by YouTube to be here to record the behind the scenes of what really happens, to bring this conversation forward to my audience that trust me. So in the same vein of me saying, purchase this new product, I'm also saying to them, are you aware that these are the effects of climate change? Are you aware that these are the behavioral changes that you can make today? And I know this because I've been recently running all these polls with my audience. I recently got invited for the launch of the BMW electric car, and I said, electric cars are better for the environment. And I have this poll saying, yes, I agree, but I don't know why. Why is it good for the environment? And when you look at the results, a lot of people just don't know anything about climate change.
Yeah.
They just don't know. And I've just learned recently, being again invited to these spaces, that you can bring forward this conversation without ever using the two words climate change. I can talk about, and that's why, I'm launching this series about sustainability and kids on my lifestyle platform, where I'm taking my kids to the big recycling center to say, oh, this is why you need to recycle, or this is why we need to plant more trees, without literally using the word climate change. And step by step, that influences people to do better without using words like net zero, 1.5 degree, we're going to die by 2030,
To that point, James, I think that leads me on to, your career as someone been incredibly successful at selling products and services, and there's a science and a magic and a brilliance to that, and it's a superpower. Imagine if Mother Earth came to you and said, look, you're a really famous advertising exec, right? I'm hiring you. Can you help me give a rebrand? Because I'm kind of a little bit sick and I'm dying at the moment. Like, I'm terminal, but I might be able to turn it around. Like, can you help me convince all the people that are poisoning me? Like, what would you, rather than using exactly the same doom and gloom and all that sometimes, words that are middle-class academic privilege that a lot of normal people don't understand. What would you give it? Maybe you want to give it some thought. I've really put him on the spot here.
Okay.
But it'd be interesting to think, though, wouldn't it? What kind of campaign could you do? To help Mother Earth communicate when it's not using the same lexicon that is alienating to people?
So I'm inherently a very optimistic person, and so I believe that things will come good, and I want them to come good, so I believe it, so they will. You know what I mean? It's a bit like that, and I've always been about storytelling.
Okay.
Yeah, it's always been about storytelling, and it's always about the narrative that you're putting out there, and language has such an important role to play. Okay. And it's very persuasive, so for me, without being able to come up with a strapline on the spot, I'm afraid. Sorry, I can't do that.
Maybe by the end of the talk.
Maybe by the end of the talk. My final comment is that people talk a lot. People do use terminology like degrowth, okay, and stuff like that, and de this, and and as you were sort of explaining about, you know, the 1.5 and it's all going to end, etc. I really like thoughts around sort of regeneration and regrowth.
Okay,
And,
so they're positive actions,
so
moving towards pleasure, right? Again,
it's a
Yeah.
positive intention,
Mm.
and I do believe that we can right the wrongs that have been done to the planet, and that we can fix this situation, and we've just got to change our behaviour with it, and it is, as you say, it is Mother Earth, it is Mother Nature, and if treated in the right way, then I believe it will come to fix itself. Okay. And so for me, I would look to the language, and I'd look to something that is that has positive and optimistic trajectory around re.
Yeah.
So there's re-commerce, and there's
Yes.
regrowth, and there's
Very good
regeneration,
point.
and
Yeah.
I want to create positivity and the same belief with people that we can do this, because I don't want everybody going inside their shells and then not being able to take action, because it's about action, and
Yeah.
it is about people doing something,
And not telling them not what to do, but telling them what they can do.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it needs to be progressive.
Yes.
Okay.
It reminds me, actually, funny, one of the mantras we have in my business is, you know, built based on my puppy trainers. I got a puppy in the pandemic, and he was teaching me how to train her and how to get her good behavior. And he taught me that the one thing you do is you don't say, get down, or don't do that, or, you know, get off the sofa. He said, if you ever give a negative correction to the dog, you've got to give them a positive action to do instead. And I was like, oh my God, that's so interesting. So what we do when we talk to fashion brands is say, look, it's not great that you're using all this polyester, but how about some organic cotton? You know, and I think it's back to your point, right? Like the minute you give people a way out, an alternative option,
That's
and
it.
something that's based on positivity, moving away from pain and towards pleasure.
That's it.
That's the same for kids, by the way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, no, you can't eat ice cream for lunch, but I'll give you a carrot, and then we're going to have our meal,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
That's it.
And I think with that in mind, with that positive framework in mind, we're moving towards the end of the session. And Adana, I'd love to ask you, since you do have a huge amount of influence over a digital community, as does Jamila, and I want to hear from you on this as well. You know, what if you were given the mandate to write the influencer playbook, like the gospel of rules, like this is how, if influencers were all going to behave in a way that was responsible, purpose-driven, you know, not harming their ability to make a profit, but with, you know, like Aisling does in her as a B leader with B Corp, you know, balancing out people, planet, and profit, like, you know, what kind of things, because this is something you've already tried and tested. You obviously are a responsible, you're an eco-tuber, you know, you're a creator. What would you say to influencers out there so that they could, you know, it's not like we're saying they shouldn't be allowed to operate, but how could they be more responsible? And what would be like the rules, you know, like do this, don't do that, and then at least you'll stop generating those kind of click-throughs on Shopify or whatever.
So I think the responsibility that every influencer should take, and again, I'm saying this as someone who's also recently come into this space, understanding what responsibility I owe to my audience who trust me, is to start this conversation, really, and to come in, because I'll be honest with you as well, even when I became woke to this conversation, I was very worried that the last 10 years, my content has never had the word climate change or sustainability or XYZ. So I felt like an imposter. Like, what am I going to say? I don't have a background in climate science. You know, why am I here? What's my voice going to sound like in this space? And it took me going to the YouTube Climate Action Summit in New York and in London, hearing stories from people that were genuinely affected and invited there to share their stories, and connecting that to, you know, my status as a mother, because one person said, how are we leaving this planet for our kids? And that was the first time that I just bawled my eyes crying. And I just thought, well, I have kids, my platform is lifestyle, my kids are there. If I come into this space, what can I do responsibly as a mother? And that really influenced the place that I shopped, the activities I involved my kids in, and the lessons that I taught them. And in the same vein, filming it, putting it on my platform to inspire other parents to teach their children. So if I was going to say this to, any influencer, without feeling like an imposter, think about what's your content about, what's your platform about, and how can you then weave in that conversation through storytelling and putting your hands up to say, I'm not perfect, but I'm aware and I'm trying to do good. Because another danger is being cancelled online, right? If I came out, like even till now, I've not come out to say I am now a climate change activist and a sustainability champion. No. I'm just continuing with my life more intentionally so that anybody watching the video is thinking, oh, she's actually just gone to a secondhand shop. Like, 2 years ago, she was going to these boutiques and buying brand new. But I didn't have to tell you. You're seeing what I'm doing the same way you saw what I was doing.
Yeah, show, don't tell.
Yeah, so it's about, it's about living by example and not using those words that would make you be called out or risk being cancelled if you make a mistake.
Okay,
because
so you don't set yourself up for failure.
Don't set yourself up for failure because it's not realistic that all of us can make the change like a light switch. I mean, we all flew in planes to get here.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
We're not perfect.
We're not.
So why would I set myself up for failure? So my thing is, if I was to walk in now, I would say to every influencer, be aware of the climate, the conversation, intentionally weave that into the content that you're already doing, and be careful of the brands that you promote going forward.
Okay. And to James's purpose, because it could be anything. It could be recycling. It could be recycled materials. It could be, it could be supporting brands or working with brands that have better labour practices and uplift other underprivileged communities. It could be anything. And right? There's many different ways to find your purpose.
Yes, and right? I also believe that in the conversation of climate action, there's so many moving parts, and even if you champion just one, that's good enough. And you could be championing one and still fall short in 10 others, and that's okay. And so if my role as a creator is saying, oh, do you know what COP is about? I'm here with YouTube. This is what's happening, and we're having this conversation because our planet is in danger, and end of story. For me, my contribution is the storytelling, is the awareness, is the education of what is happening. And then, they have free reign on social media to get inspired by somebody who's channeling another cause in climate action.
Good advice. Yeah,
so you can't be everything, but if you're intentional about being one thing, like James said, if you say from now on I'm not going to buy a plastic bottle of water, I'm going to refill, or I will turn off the light better, or I will turn off the tap when I brush my teeth, or I'm not going to take a long shower, that's it. And for me, my thing is just my children, because they're the future. We're talking about the future of the planet. They're the future. The reason why we have difficulty changing our behavior is because we grew up thinking that a lot of the bad behaviors are okay. So now I'm in this unique position to influence my 6-year-old and my 4-year-old and my 1-year-old.
And your audiences.
And my audience.
And I'm going to also a mother, and you presumably have to do a similar thing to Dr. Adana, but in a different way, which is to try and get buy-in from either the board at Soho House, from your colleagues, from the juniors, whether it's the people who maybe collecting the garbage or picking up the towels off the floor, to your members. Like, do you find any challenges around how to sell people? Because we've kind of come around to this point about how you sell sustainability, right? I asked James about how would you sell a campaign, Mother Earth is his client, right? Like, how do you sell sustainability and all of those purpose-related things to your both members and colleagues? Because it's a big task.
Yeah. Well, look, I think I'm in a pretty lucky position as somebody who works in brand responsibility, and that the majority of the stakeholders that I'm engaging with, whether it's our board or our leadership team or our members or our teams in the houses, are all pretty aligned with what the values and the mission of Soho House are, which are a planet positive space that is connecting people, etc. And what I would say actually to other people who work in brand responsibility, I read this study from Forbes earlier that said 87% of brand advisors say that sustainability never comes up when they talk to their clients. And I think the reason for that is that brands are afraid to lean in because there is cancel culture and there is this risk that you'll be told you're a greenwasher or you're not doing enough if you're a brand that wants to talk about something
It's fear
that
of
you're
exposure.
not super confident about. And in that study, Forbes said that of the ones that do engage in the topic, they keep it to one thing, to just materials mostly, actually. And so I think by not leaning in and talking about your challenges to your stakeholders or to your customers, your clients, or to one another, it's a huge disservice to your business, to the planet, to your teams. And I think just having those conversations, you'll find that there's actually so many ideas out there. I mean, I don't know everything about sustainability, and I'm definitely not solving it all on my own. Every time I connect with a team member in a different house, they have an idea about something really cool or interesting that they're learning about in Hong Kong that we can try and maybe implement in Miami or, LA and Mykonos and Canawa. And all these different, voices and thoughts and ideas are all so available if you just ask and be transparent about your goals and the challenges you're having and working together as a community, whether, regardless of if they're on the payroll or not, if they're your members, if they're your teams. I think it really will take all of us having these conversations to come up with solutions that are accessible, that we can implement, that will help us
like James said, exactly.
get to our goals.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think we're almost at time. I think we'll probably close out by the last question I have for all of you, which is, what would you, knowing what you do now, given that we all of my brilliant panelists here are working with purpose and trying to make the world a better place, some of you are parents here, some aren't. What would you say to either your children or your 18-year-old self, to give them inspiration and hope for a better place in the world? Aisling, let's start with you.
So this is a really interesting question because I asked the same thing last year at COP26 to a woman called Mary Robinson, and she's the first female president of Ireland.
Yes.
And she became the president when I was 7. And so I got to meet her last year at COP26, which was very exciting. And she went on the record saying that COP was too male, too pale, and too stale.
Right.
And she said, she went on the record, she doesn't care anymore. She's saying, she's speaking her truth.
Okay.
And she said, a lot of people are shocked by that, really. But she was like, this is because diversity and inclusion has everything to do with the climate crisis. And the same thinking that has created the problems is not going to create the solutions. So we need to have diversity at every level of leadership, in politics, in business. So, everyone get over your imposter syndrome, get over your fears, step into those roles. You need to see it to be it. You need to role model.
Good advice. Well said. James, what about you?
So I think I would say that between, where I'm at and where my 15-year-old daughter, let's say, is at, and the way that things are, and I do say this to her, which is that I think that the power dynamic has shifted, and it's flipped, or it's flipping, and people, all people, are so much more empowered than I think we used to be, than I was when I was 15.
And that's because of of technology,
and
right?
It's all to do with technology. It really is all to do with technology. It's
having
all
a
to
platform.
Do with what we've been talking about today, and the platforms that are available to do it, and the fact that we now live in a creator economy. I mean, we do. So I know there is, and there are, a lot of pressures because we are social beings, and I really feel that, and I really get it for her. But equally, there's power that comes from that, and so my message to any 15-year-old is you are empowered, and you can, either with yourself or with your friends and your contacts and connections, you can make the change, and you can be the change. So don't sit back, take some action.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, it's not about being a keyboard warrior or what they call a slacktivist, right? Like, that's helpful, but action is it's more than just cancel culture. It's more than call out, as you say. It's moving away from that pain and being negative towards people, but it's actually being positive as well, right? Like, and it's action, it's not just words that become pixels in some great big metaverse somewhere. Jamila.
Okay, so my daughter's 7. So
Okay.
I guess what I would say to her, and what I love what you're doing, Dr. Adana, with sustainability in kids, is just to ask lots of questions, right? I think we as a society are really not trained to understand like the true cost of the things that we're consuming and the processes that we're involved in. And it's really going to be up to us and our kids to lean into these conversations and to challenge brands, to challenge your governments, to come up with these answers. And they expect it at this point. You know, we've been doing it for a while now, and they should have the answers, or
should.
you know, at least be coming up with some sort of ideas and plans and communicating a vision forward that is for a sustainable future. I just don't think that it's acceptable not to have that anymore.
And what would that challenge look like? Like, are you talking about sending an email to your MP or your senator? Are you talking about turning up to one of their rallies? Are you talking about how does that look as an action, that challenge that you're giving to those people who hold the power?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's whatever vehicle you can use. So if it is sending an email, or if it's asking your teacher in school to find out more answers about the things that she's teaching you, or if it's talking to your parents or your friends, or you know, the brands online via DM on Instagram, just continually be asking. And the more that we as a society challenge these things, the more that we as a society will grow towards it being the norm that we're all talking about and thinking about how we can make things more sustainable for our future.
Okay. And I think, Dr. Adana, let's hear your...
Yeah, so I think to conclude, I will conclude in agreement with everything that you've all said. You know, your contribution on diversity, you can't beat if you don't see it, about asking questions and being hopeful for a better future. These are the conversations that I will start to have more clearly with my children in a few years. Right now, they're still very young, 6, 4, and 1. So I think a lot of the weight lies on me as the parent and being intentional about what I teach them and the environment that I expose them to. You know, it's only this year that my kids started going to school in a classroom. They were in forest school, since they were born. You know, teaching them about nature, teaching them little sustainable practices at home, encouraging their curiosity, getting them to ask questions. You know, that I think that would evolve into being activists without telling them you have to be activists. It's teaching them to love nature and do good in a way that they feel connected to take action and to inspire other people doing it.
So it just becomes like a default.
It becomes like a default. And we're all woke at different times. So even now that I'm more aware of what I should be teaching my children, there's a lot of parents that are not aware of it now. And so I hope that if, as a creator, if I'm not able to bring this message to everyone that I would hope to reach, the practices that I'm teaching my children now, they would be able to inspire the children of the parents who are, adults now. So I just hope that would be like a domino effect, and then we end up with a better planet.
Well said. Thank you very much indeed. And I think I would love to close out. We started this talk by looking at the psychology of desire and what goes on in our brains and those similar circuits that are operating in. Will go forward into the new metaverse that we're going to all apparently be involved in. And I think the main thing is just to be mindful of, to be aware of when those like reward circuits are triggering, because you can feel that kind of rush of like, oh, I'm going to get this thing. I've definitely had that when I've been, we've all done that, right? So I think if you know what's going on, you can take a little bit more charge of it, right? Like if you're aware of what's either going on in your brain or in your device, and how you are, subject or victim of that, you can then move again away that pleasure and pain thing. You start to think, well, what is pleasure? Pleasure shouldn't be about that quick fix of owning or buying something. Pleasure should be about really the pleasure you get and the karma, the good karma that comes from doing something that is about people and planet, as opposed to just an immediately sort of individualistic quick fix. That's pleasure. And pain is not just felt on an individual level. Every pain, if we create pain for the planet, eventually it starts to spread throughout humanity, right? So I think it's for lots of people to think about what is pleasure and pain on a personal and on a collective and universal level. I think with that, we'll open up the floor if there's any questions. Does anyone here have any questions? Philippe. I'll grab that one, actually.
Great talk, by the way. Thank you. Being at COP and with all the government ministers here, what change are you looking for in our government representatives to aid us in this new mission we're on?
And is that question for anyone specific, or shall I?
Yeah, for the panel.
James, why don't you take that? Thank you.
Sorry. Well, I mean, in the role I'm doing now, there's a very clear sort of trifecta, a three-party piece that has to happen to make all this change happen, and the three elements to that are we need new technology. We need new ways of doing things. Okay, that's one piece. We then need the financing behind it. So we need private finance to then be able to fund that new technology and make it mass. And the third thing that we need is we then need government to set the right environment and to put the right regulations in place to allow all of that to happen. And all of that is then surrounded by all of us people who demand it. And so for me, I'm very clear on the role that those ministers need to play and the role that government needs to play, which is to help set the vision and then help set the right environment with the right regulations so that all of this can happen.
But what if, Ashley on Tuna said, but it's not part of the problem, the fact that most governments, unless they're in tyrannies or dictatorships, in a lot of countries around the world, the government's in for maybe 1 or 2 terms. If they don't have the 25-year plan, because they won't be in power at that point, they'll be taking their pension and going into lobbying, or going to back into the private sector, capitalising on the network they've built as a minister. So how does one that's a question for you, James, is how do you reconcile that, the short-termism of holding policy and holding office, with the longer-term game that's needed to have these much longer term strategies?
Well, so fortunately, I think the answer to that is the same one that I talked about around marketing and brands, which is that it's a two-way street. And so long as there is democracy involved, then it's better and there's more opportunity. And so because again, it's where there is democracy involved, there is then the powers with the people, and so those government ministers know that if they're going to get re-elected, then they need to do the right thing. And when you are involved in the middle of that trifecta, that is a lever that you pull with governments and with government when you're dealing with government ministers, and I'm dealing with government ministers week in, week out.
Yes.
And you have to you have to push the right buttons. Let's put it that way.
But what if you're not used to dealing with them, and like you're 22 years old, you're from Cambodia or you're from Colombia, and you had just a cell phone at your disposal, and you've been in school but you've not been out there in the bigger, wider world? Like, what would you advise someone like that to make them feel empowered, that they can then pull those levers? Like, what are their levers? It's like using technology with communications, right, to communicate with those in power.
Yes, I mean it is, and I mean you've only got to look at the wave of youth power that's going on around the world, and looking at what they are doing and the ways that they're doing it. And I mean, I actually often I'll talk to my kids actually about being and sorry that it's a bit of a phrase, but being a climate actionist rather than being a climate activist. And so just again, it goes back to the point of take a bit of action. You don't have to get out on the streets with a banner. You don't have to. But if you're not getting the change that you want, then do. And you don't have to get out on the streets. You can get out on the right platform.
Get on your device.
And use technology. Use your phone to create that pressure.
Brilliant. Aisling, I know you had something to say.
I had a question for James. If be a climate actionist was the strap line you promised us at the end of the...
I would just like to add on your question as well. We work a lot with big businesses. And so there's this role of chief sustainability officer now, which lots of companies have. And so what does a chief sustainability officer actually do, right? So at the briefing for COP27, we sat down with like the chief sustainability officers for Unilever and for Netflix, and all these big businesses. And they were looking at the countries that are doing this really well. And the countries that are doing it really well is Denmark. And the role of a chief sustainability officer in Denmark is they spend 50% of their time sitting with the government with policy. So any policy that's pushed out to business isn't just handed over and it doesn't work. It's co-created between business and government.
Fantastic.
And then it works. And then this thing of growing the economy at any cost that is creating an environmental collapse and exploiting people doesn't happen, right? It's growing the economy responsibly.
Well, that's a brilliant answer to Philippe's question, and great question as well, Philippe. Thank you. And I think we're at time, aren't we? So we should probably wrap it there. Thank you all very, very much for watching. I hope that's given you lots to think about. And a big thank you to my panellists. We'll have a round of applause. Thank you very much.